She was the forbidden existence that made the entire papacy tremble for more than 400 years. Legend says she faked stigmata through self-harm and harvested faith with plagues. At that time, the entire Catholic world went mad because of her, calling her a living saint, and even God seemed to aid her. On the night before the Vatican sent envoys to interrogate her, a divine sign appeared. A comet streaked across the sky above the convent. She seized the moment to plead for all the citizens of the city, appearing to pray but in truth seizing power. Sure enough, at the trial assembly the next day, when she was pushed toward the fire pit as a sinner, the crowd erupted, especially when they saw her hands and feet mysteriously bleeding and her mouth uttering saintly words. The scene spun out of control. Thus, with her own strength, she not only refuted the envoy but also manipulated the entire city with lies. Yet beneath the halo of miracles, she was the corrupter hidden in the deepest part of the convent. The Virgin Mary statue secretly stolen and hidden inside the Bible was not only the most concealed secret between her and her companion but also the witness of their forbidden passion, and this became one of the most shocking pages in religious history. Adapted from a real 17th century investigation, The Unruly Act. During the Italian Renaissance, there was a nun named Benedetta, who almost died at birth because her mother gave birth with difficulty, and she mistakenly believed she was saved by God. From then on she had unwavering faith in miracles, and her father at that time also made a vow to dedicate his daughter to God, so he named her Benedetta, meaning to receive the grace of God. But when she was 9 years old, on the way her father kept his promise and sent her to the convent. They were robbed by bandits, and the bandits snatched away her mother's necklace with a spear. Everyone dared not breathe, but Benedetta pointed to one of the bandits and said, "If you do not return the necklace, I will make the Virgin punish you. Whatever I say, the Virgin will do." As soon as her words fell, a nightingale flew from a branch. The bandit looked up, and at that moment bird droppings hit him right on the face. Seeing this, the crowd burst into laughter and no longer troubled them, and this was the first time Benedetta displayed her divine trick. At the moment she used the name of the Virgin to scare away the robbers. She tasted the sweetness of divine power and witnessed its might. From then on it was as if a door of awakening opened. After that they traveled safely and smoothly arrived at the Pescia convent. At that time it was the late 16th century, when religion flourished at its peak, and with plagues and wars everywhere, the convent became almost the only refuge for women, but places were very limited. The old abbess seemed hesitant, but the hidden meaning was you need to pay more. Finally, after some bargaining, her father, with 100 gold coins plus annual offerings of fruit and wine, successfully secured his daughter's entry into the convent. But on her very first night there, another miracle happened to Benedetta, because the Virgin Mary statue she carried with her was taken away by an old nun and locked inside a cabinet. She could not sleep, so she secretly went to pray before the convent's main statue of the Virgin. But just as she began to speak, the stone statue suddenly loosened and fell right onto her body. When the nuns worked together to lift the statue, they discovered that Benedetta was not only unharmed but did not even have a scratch, and this Virgin statue was carved from fine stone and weighed over 100 pounds. The old abbess looked grave and said nothing. Just before returning to her room, her daughter Giuliano asked her, "Mother, was that truly a miracle?" Her mother denied it firmly, saying that admitting a miracle would be far more troublesome than the miracle itself. Time passed quickly, and 18 years later, the intelligent Benedetta soon became the most outstanding among her fellow nuns, and the abbess valued her greatly, having her play the role of a devout follower of Jesus. But during the performance, she suddenly fell into a vision, seeing Jesus surrounded by a flock of sheep, calling her name again and again. And at that moment Benedetta believed with all her heart that she was the chosen one. Yet just as she was about to run toward Jesus, her strange behavior was noticed by the other nuns, and her very first vision ended abruptly. Afterward, the convent held a banquet, inviting not only the local parish priest but also Benedetta's parents, because all the food that night was exclusively sponsored by them. Benedetta told her mother about seeing Jesus, and her mother froze, clearly unconvinced. But Benedetta insisted further, and just as the banquet ended, the convent's gate was suddenly struck with frantic pounding, accompanied by heart-wrenching cries for help. The abbess rushed to open the door, and there stood a disheveled girl, driven into the courtyard by a flock of sheep. Her entrance eerily resembled the Jesus from Benedetta's vision. The girl knelt at Benedetta's feet, sobbing that she had been beaten and violated by her stepfather. Seeing his daughter drawn into this mess, Benedetta's father kicked the stepfather to the ground, while the girl seized the chance to rush to the abbess, pleading that she too could devote herself to Jesus if only the abbess would take her in. But the convent was no charity, and the abbess asked what she could bring to the convent. Benedetta looked at the girl's pitiful state and softened, and in the end, it was Benedetta's father who bore the burden. He bought the girl's freedom from her stepfather and then made a donation to the convent. At that time, Benedetta still did not know that this wild outsider was about to change her life forever. The girl's name was Bartomea, an untamed soul without education, bold and carefree, who even leaned out of the window while bathing until her foot slipped. Benedetta instinctively reached to catch her, but in the instant she touched her body, an unfamiliar sensation suddenly surged through her. Later Benedetta also discovered scars on Bartolomea's thigh, and Bartolomea, completely unashamed, lifted her skirt to show the wound while casually describing how she was beaten by her stepfather and mistreated by her two brothers. Benedetta listened in shock and murmured that being too beautiful was not always a blessing, and hearing Benedetta call her beautiful, Bartolomea instantly lit up. Then Bartolomea asked if Benedetta had ever looked in a mirror, and Benedetta gazed at her and said, "You can see your reflection in my eyes." So the two drew closer and closer, and the atmosphere grew more and more ambiguous. But at the crucial moment, the abbess's daughter Giuliano suddenly appeared, and just like that, they each returned to their rooms. But before going to sleep, Bartolomea suddenly kissed Benedetta, and that kiss threw Benedetta into panic. So she hurried to the statue of the Virgin and asked, "Is this girl a test sent by God?" And after that night, her visions suddenly changed in style and became increasingly strange. The next day, when all the nuns gathered to sing hymns, Bartolomea secretly hooked her finger across Benedetta's back, and this straightforward expression of desire both fascinated Benedetta and made her feel sinful. With a sharp cry, the vision appeared again. Countless venomous snakes darted at her with their tongues, and in her cries for help, Jesus descended and cut off all their tongues, but desire still remained. Jesus told her that there were still sinners around her, and that it was not yet the time to meet. And from then on, Benedetta deliberately began to distance herself from Bartolomea, even targeting her at times. Just because Bartolomea accidentally dropped a thread into boiling water, Benedetta ordered her to reach in with her bare hands, and Bartolomea's hand was severely scalded, and the matter reached the abbess's ears. So Benedetta was punished to wash the sisters' bed sheets for half a month, and on her way back to her room, Benedetta happened to see Bartolomea tending to her wound, and she could not even bring herself to meet her eyes. And that very night, Benedetta was seized by violent pain. Several nuns could not hold her down, and the doctor found no symptoms, only giving her cherry lychee juice to calm her. Bartolomea quietly came to Benedetta's bedside, asking why she treated her so cruelly, saying she wanted to stay by her side forever. And as Bartolomea kissed her again, the vision was triggered once more. She was chased by a group of bandits and was about to be violated, when Jesus appeared again, cutting down the bandits from horseback. But when she drew closer, she discovered that the man in white was not Jesus, but instead demanded she reveal herself. And Benedetta resisted desperately, waking up from the struggle, and the others thought she had fallen ill again, so they fed her more cherry lychee juice, worried about her health. Bartolomea volunteered to the abbess to care for her, and secretly brought Benedetta the childhood dress and the wooden virgin statue, and just like that the two reconciled, and their conversations again became intimate. But on the very first night Bartolomea slept by her side, Benedetta once more had a vision, Jesus nailed to the cross, inviting her to shed her garments and suffer with him. And the moment Benedetta pressed her hands to the cross, in reality her own body suddenly bled profusely and she writhed in agony. And when Bartolomea woke in shock, she saw that Benedetta's body bore the stigmata, and this was the first time in the story that a genuine miracle appeared. The next day, Benedetta told the abbess about the stigmata, and since the wounds matched those of Christ's crucifixion, everyone fell to their knees in worship. The old abbess, though still suspicious, knew the matter was grave, so she reported it to the parish priest. Upon examination, Benedetta's hands and feet continued to bleed, but the greatest sign of stigmata was the wound left on Jesus's forehead by the crown of thorns, and Benedetta's forehead was untouched. So the abbess still doubted the truth of her wounds, but the priest did not care about such details, because if the news spread that Benedetta bore the stigmata, her town of Pescia would become a holy destination for countless pilgrims. For in the past, one nun had risen to become one of the most influential women in Europe by the power of stigmata and visions, though later she was proven to be nothing more than a fraud chasing fame and fortune. That still did not erase the value she once brought, and just as the priest continued to press the abbess, In the corridor, Benedetta suddenly collapsed before the Virgin statue. Not only did blood run down her forehead, but she also uttered a man's voice from her mouth. Blasphemy! And just as everyone stood in shock, Giuliano noticed shards of glass on the ground. At such a convenient miracle, the abbess was about to raise her doubts, but the priest immediately rebuked her. He did not care whether it was real or fake, as long as there were stigmata. And so, not long after, the priest declared before the entire parish that Benedetta was the Virgin's chosen, and appointed her as the new abbess. But the old abbess's daughter Giuliano exploded with anger. She had already doubted Benedetta's identity, and now that her mother's position had been replaced, she questioned the priest on the spot. The abbess's seat. Is it your will, or God's will? This terrified the old abbess, who quickly silenced her daughter. Only then did the handover ceremony finish smoothly. Meanwhile, news of Benedetta's stigmata quickly spread among the people. Countless citizens came bearing flowers, and they expected even more than the priest himself that a saint would appear to save them from suffering. Watching this, Giuliano grew angrier and angrier, but with no witnesses and no evidence, the abbess could not support her daughter. She could only calm Giuliano, saying, I have my own way to prove whether the one sent by God is truly Jesus or just a madwoman. At last the abbess moved out of her office, but no one noticed that hidden behind the wall there was a peephole, and with no idea they were being watched, Benedetta and Bartolomea became bolder and bolder once they had their own private space. That very night they crossed the forbidden line. Before becoming abbess, Benedetta had never dared respond to Bartolomea's affection, nor even dared expose her body before her. But once she became abbess, she let herself go completely. By day she was Bartolomea's teacher, teaching her to read and write hand in hand, and by night, Bartolomea became Benedetta's teacher. Not long after, the death of an old nun pushed the entire story to a climax. This nun was the very one who had once taken away Benedetta's Virgin statue. For many years she upheld the virtue of enduring suffering, yet in the end she was still tormented to death by illness. Even after Benedetta prayed for her, her pain was not eased at all. At last her faith was broken, and she told Giuliano that it was all lies before dying in agony, and her death tormented Giuliano greatly. What kind of miracles? All of it was fake. So that night, she formally reported to the convent's priest, claiming she had seen with her own eyes Benedetta using glass to fake the stigmata, and that her mother the abbess could testify. In fact, neither of them had seen it. Giuliano's true intent was to gamble with her own reputation and drag her mother onto the ship by force. But at the confrontation, the old abbess chose to speak the truth because whether real or fake, since Benedetta became the Virgin, the convent's offerings had indeed multiplied, and she truly had not seen it, and dared not lie before the statue. But the consequence of this was only to make Benedetta's power even stronger.
Avete mentito!
Ah! Lei non crede in me! È Satana, è lui che la possiede! Deve essere punita! La flagellazione! Si deve flagellare!
Il diavolo va cacciato dal vostro corpo!
In the end, Giuliano's accusation failed, and she was punished with whipping. And from that moment on, Benedetta fully grasped the rules of the game. She believed that the so-called church and convent were nothing but a system of power built on lies. Jesus was the symbol of power in this system, the totem, and she was the agent carrying out the will of Jesus, the branch holder of power. After reaching this conclusion, the religious shackles weighing on Benedetta were completely broken. She accepted the Virgin statue handed to her by Bartolomea with peace of mind. But everything the two of them did was clearly seen by the old abbess through the peephole in the wall. Just then, a strange sound came from the heavens. As a comet streaked over the convent, the entire sky turned blood red, as if foretelling disaster, and Giuliano, discouraged after her failed accusation, took the chance to climb to the rooftop. The old abbess saw her daughter's intention and rushed up crying, but she was still a step too late, and the old abbess was nearly broken. But Benedetta insisted on performing before the crowd, claiming she could redeem Giuliano's soul. This completely drove the old abbess over the edge. I had wanted to play by the rules, but now my daughter is dead, so none of you will play anymore. That very night, she set out for Florence, determined to find the papal envoy and expose Benedetta. But upon arriving she discovered Florence had long become a plague-ridden disaster zone. The streets were filled with burning, looting, and corpses lying everywhere, even in front of the papal seat. Yet inside the papal palace, everything was tranquil, and the envoy still lived in luxury, even introducing his pregnant wife. Meanwhile, back at the convent, Bartolomea grew worried after learning the old abbess had gone to seek help. She too suspected that Benedetta's miracles were most likely false, but seeing Benedetta shift from joy to pain as she prayed, she herself was unsure. And so, a few days later, the plague reached Pescia as well. The townspeople all poured into the streets, praying for God's protection. Seeing her chance, Benedetta spoke in the name of the Virgin Mary. The comet in the sky is a sign from Jesus guiding me, and the town of Pescia will be spared from the plague. As soon as she said this, the crowd erupted in excitement. She then ordered the guards, in the name of Jesus, to lock the city gates. People could leave, but no one could enter. After doing all this, there was one final and most crucial step: faking her death to escape. Because on the other side, a papal envoy had already requested an investigation from the Vatican after hearing about Benedetta, and he was now on his way, so she needed to perform another miracle. Sure enough, the moment the envoy arrived, he was stopped by guards outside the city. The envoy claimed he came under the Pope's orders and demanded the gates be opened, but the guards were unfazed. The Pope may be powerful, but is he greater than Jesus? We take our orders directly from him. The envoy was furious. At that moment, the local priest brought news of the Virgin's death and advised them to drop the investigation and return home. But the envoy, already enraged, responded with threats and prepared to force his way in. The guards were ready for a violent confrontation, but the priest, being part of the system, didn't dare offend the envoy too much, so he allowed them into the city. And so, the envoy and his men marched into the convent. Just as the envoy approached Benedetta's body and began anointing her with holy water, Benedetta suddenly opened her eyes and shouted, "Jesus, don't leave!" She told the crowd that after she died, Jesus had taken her to heaven. She saw that everyone was about to be consumed by the Black Death, so Jesus sent her back to save them. But the envoy was unimpressed and told her to worry about saving herself first. Benedetta quickly added, "Jesus also said, 'Only if I live can everyone else live.'" But clearly, that statement came a little too late. The very next morning, the envoy held a trial for Benedetta, accusing her of blasphemy, promoting heresy, and moral corruption. The first witness was the former abbess, who described everything she had seen through the peephole. Benedetta remained expressionless, as if none of it concerned her, but Bartomea couldn't hide her panic. She was visibly distressed. They also examined the wall and confirmed the hole's existence, so the envoy took Bartomea to the torture chamber alone, stripped her naked, and strapped her to the bed. What followed was too brutal to describe. Those curious can look it up. Bartomea couldn't endure the torture and confessed everything, but Benedetta didn't know any of this yet. She went to plead with the envoy, even washing his feet. During their exchange, both sides tested each other's intentions, but Benedetta's answers were flawless. She also noticed a leech on the envoy's thigh. This hinted that he might have contracted the plague. Benedetta immediately saw an opportunity to turn the tables, but the envoy had lost all patience and ordered Bartomea to be brought in. Right in front of Benedetta, they revealed the wooden Virgin Mary statue. Seeing her dark secret exposed, Benedetta once again spoke in the voice of Jesus. But while that might fool the public, the envoy didn't buy it at all. If miracles truly existed, why would the church need clergy like us? Thus, the charges were confirmed, and judgment was delivered. Bartomea was expelled from the convent for being an accomplice. The priest was removed from office for shielding a heretic, and Benedetta was sentenced to be burned at the stake in 3 days, convicted of blasphemy, heresy, and moral corruption. But at the moment of sentencing, the former abbess coughed up blood. She, too, seemed infected with the plague. The envoy, upon hearing this, immediately ordered her to be imprisoned and left to die. But on the night before the execution, Benedetta requested one final prayer session with the former abbess. The envoy agreed. However, as soon as they met, the two began arguing. The abbess said, "I don't believe a word you say." But Benedetta replied, "You spent your whole life serving God, but never truly believed in him. That's why you ended up like this." The abbess was stunned by the logic and asked Benedetta, "What exactly did God say to you?" After Benedetta whispered in her ear, the abbess actually changed sides and vowed to help her overturn the verdict. The next day, as the prison gates opened, Benedetta was escorted to the execution ground. But everywhere she passed, there were protests from the townspeople. They already saw her as the Holy Virgin, and now she was to be executed publicly? That would be destroying their faith. The envoy noticed something was wrong and tried to tempt Benedetta. "If you publicly admit you faked everything, I'll spare your life." Benedetta pretended to agree, then clenched her fists in secret. Moments later, she raised her head and once again channeled the voice of Jesus. As she removed her black robe,
Voi avete tradito il mio amore! Nessuno di voi sarà risparmiato! La morte soffierà per la città! caccia tutti al suo passaggio! Guardate! L'angelo della morte ha teso le sue mani! La morte è qua! Sta camminando di già in mezzo a voi!
Everyone gasped. Her face was covered in boils, and she claimed the envoy was the one who infected her. Sensing things spiraling out of control, the envoy shouted for the guards to drag Benedetta to the stake. But just then, Bartomea screamed, "If the Holy Virgin dies, everyone will be cursed." That one sentence threw everything into chaos. The people clashed violently with the guards. Bartomea took the opportunity to rescue Benedetta. The envoy, terrified by the uprising, tried to flee but was quickly caught by the angry mob. When they tore open his robe, they found the same boils just as Benedetta had said. He brought the plague. In the end, the envoy was stabbed to death by the crowd, but before dying, he asked Benedetta one final question: "Am I going to heaven or hell?" Benedetta answered, "Heaven." The envoy smiled. He never really doubted Benedetta, only God. Like Benedetta, he had climbed to power through lies, but the difference was, their lies were meant to play the game, and everyone in the system knew it. But Benedetta was different. She played the lies so convincingly that she fooled the world, and even herself. After the envoy's death, the former abbess, now with nothing holding her back, walked into the flames, redeeming herself through fire. In the end, Benedetta and Bartomea escaped, but as the city's chaos gradually settled, Benedetta wanted to go back. Bartomea tried to stop her, but Benedetta said she was acting in Jesus' name. No one would dare touch her. Hearing this, Bartomea snapped, because at the fire pit, she had found a piece of glass stained with blood. It was the tool Benedetta used to fake the stigmata. If someone else uncovered this, the same people who saved you today would be the first to burn you tomorrow. But even then, Benedetta refused to admit to faking miracles and walked confidently back into the city. And that's where the film ends. Whether Benedetta faked the miracles or not, the film leaves unanswered, but it's based on real events. In reality, Benedetta was investigated twice, and the abbess only served 3 years. The first investigation concluded she was indeed a visionary. The second came 3 years later, when her followers grew too numerous, threatening the church's authority. This time, several nuns admitted witnessing her fake the wounds. Bartomea, under interrogation, also confessed to an improper relationship with Benedetta. Yet, for some reason, the church refused to martyr Benedetta, sentencing her instead to life imprisonment. Pescia did indeed escape the nationwide plague of 1631, and on August 7, 1661, after 35 years as a prisoner, Benedetta died of fever and abdominal pain at age 71. Bartomea died on September 18, 1660. Her life marked by suffering from the scandal. Well, no amount of commentary can truly match the power of the original film.